Of all the sounds in the world, the rattle of that small, orange plastic bottle was the one that now held the most power over me. It was a sound that whispered of change, of secrets, of a future I was both terrified and desperate to embrace. I'd shake it softly, just to hear the pills dance inside, a tiny symphony of potential that I kept hidden in an old sock in the bottom drawer of my dresser. My own personal revolution, prescribed by a discreet online service and delivered in a plain brown box. The first time I swallowed that tiny, white pill, it felt less like medicine and more like a covenant I was making with myself. There was no sudden flash of light, no visceral shudder of change. It was just me, in my bathroom, washing down a promise with a handful of tap water. But as the days turned into weeks, the changes began, not with a bang, but with a series of whispers. It was the softness of my skin that I noticed first. One morning, while applying my usual aftershave, my fingers brushed against my cheek and it felt different. Smoother. Less like sandpaper and more like worn leather being gently polished. The coarse hairs on my arms seemed to be retreating, leaving behind a fuzz that caught the light in a softer way. Then came the emotional shift. It was a slow, rising tide, not a storm. I'd always felt my emotions through a thick, muffling pane of glass. I could see them, understand them, but they rarely touched me directly. Now the glass was thinning. I found myself welling up at a commercial, a sudden lump in my throat at a piece of music I'd heard 100 times before. At first, it was alarming, this new permeability. But then I realized it wasn't that I was becoming more emotional, I was becoming more connected. The feelings were the same, but now they flowed through me, warm and deep, instead of bouncing off a numb exterior. The constant, low-grade hum of anger and frustration that had been the background noise of my life began to fade, replaced by a quiet, blooming capacity for patience and tenderness. The most profound change, however, was the quieting of the war inside my head. The constant, grating conflict between the person I saw in the mirror and the person I felt I was began to ease. It was as if the estrogen was a gentle mediator, soothing the two opposing sides. When I looked in the mirror now, the face looking back was still recognizably mine, but the sharp edges were subtly blurring. The hard line of my jaw seemed a little less severe, the texture of my skin more pliant. It wasn't a dramatic transformation anyone else would notice, but to me, it was everything. It was the universe nodding, a slow, biological confirmation that I was on the right path. Dressing became a different experience. Before, putting on women's clothes had felt like an act of defiance, a desperate attempt to clothe a body that fought against the fabric. Now, it felt like a collaboration. The soft jersey of a dress didn't clash with my skin anymore. It complemented it. When I slipped on a silk camisole, the sensation against my newly sensitive skin was not just tactile, but deeply emotional. It felt right. The reflection in the mirror was slowly, inexorably, coming into alignment with the image I had held in my heart for so long. The estrogen wasn't just changing my body, it was stitching my soul into my skin, and with every tiny, white pill, I felt more whole, more authentic, and more deeply, peacefully feminine than I had ever dreamed possible. The physical whispers of change soon found a vocal counterpart. It started with a slight, persistent tightness in my throat, a sensation not of illness, but of subtle restructuring. My voice, when I tested it alone in my car, had lost some of its gravelly resonance. It didn't suddenly leap into a higher register. That would have been startling and false, but it began to settle into a warmer, smoother tone. The hard edges of my consonants softened. The rumble in my chest became a hum. Practicing my speech exercises was no longer about forcing a sound, but about coaxing out a voice that was already there, waiting patiently beneath the surface. The first time I successfully held a conversation with a telemarketer using this new, effortless alto, my hands shook for an hour afterward with the sheer, giddy power of it. It was real. It was becoming irreversible. This new reality, however, brought its own unique terror, the fear of being perceived. My androgynous phase, which had felt so daring, was now a precarious tightrope walk. I was a blurred photograph slowly coming into focus, and I was terrified of who might be looking when the image finally cleared. My best friend, Mark, who had known me since we were kids trading baseball cards, was the first to hover on the edge of noticing. "Dude, you good?" he asked one day, squinting at me across our video game screens. "You look different. You lose weight? Your face looks, I don't know, softer or something." I mumbled something about a new skincare routine and changed the subject, my heart hammering against my ribs. The lies felt different now, too. They weren't protective armor. They were flimsy curtains hiding a masterpiece I was desperate to unveil. The greatest test came during a weekend visit from my gruff, well-meaning father. His world was built on certain, unshakable truths, and one of them was that he had a son. He clapped me on the back with the same force he always had, but his hand lingered for a fraction of a second, his brow furrowed. "You feeling okay, Alex?" he asked, his voice laced with a confusion he couldn't articulate. "You seem quiet." I saw him watching me sometimes, his eyes tracing the new, subtle curves of my body in a loose-fitting sweater, a question mark hovering in the air between us that neither of us dared to voice. The love in his eyes was still there, but it was now tangled with a bewilderment that felt like a physical chasm. Hiding the truth from him was the most painful part of the journey, a constant, low-grade ache of anticipation and dread for the conversation I knew was inevitable. The day the first tangible, undeniable evidence of my transformation appeared, I stood frozen in front of the bathroom mirror, my breath caught somewhere between panic and a profound, trembling awe. It was no longer just about softer skin or a gentler voice. Nestled on my chest, barely a swell but unmistakably present, was the beginning of breast tissue. I touched the spot, my fingers encountering a new, tender firmness beneath my skin. This wasn't a change I could hide with a looser shirt or explain away with a new diet. This was a fundamental, biological line being crossed. The orange bottle in my sock drawer was no longer just dispensing potential. It was building a new reality, brick by microscopic brick, right on my body. The fear was a cold spike. This was the point of no return. But rising to meet it, warmer and stronger, was a feeling of rightness so absolute it brought tears to my eyes. This body was finally, physically, agreeing with me. Navigating the world became a daily exercise in careful calibration. My voice, my gestures, my growing chest, they were all pieces of a puzzle that was assembling itself in public. I started wearing compression tops under my clothes, a necessary but deeply uncomfortable disguise that felt like a betrayal of the very progress I was celebrating in private. The dissonance was exhausting. I'd come home after a day of playing a muted version of my old self, strip off the constricting layers, and stand in front of my mirror, just breathing. Seeing the subtle, real changes in the safe solitude of my room was my reward, a reminder of the truth that was steadily, irrevocably unfolding. One evening, I dared to venture further. With the house to myself, I didn't just put on my usual jeans and a top. I dressed with intention. I chose a delicate lace bralette that accommodated my new shape without hiding it, a soft flowing blouse, and a skirt that swirled around my knees. I applied my makeup not as a mask, but as an accent, highlighting the face that was emerging. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time, I didn't see a man in women's clothes. I didn't see an androgynous figure. I saw a woman. Her features were still strong, her shoulders still broad, but there was a softness, a light in her eyes, a quiet confidence in her posture that was undeniably, unequivocally female. The reflection was no longer a hope or an experiment. It was a preview. And the person looking back was someone I was falling in love with, someone I was finally, after a lifetime of searching, ready to introduce to the world. The turning point arrived not with a grand pronouncement, but with a quiet, seismic shift in my own spirit. The careful scaffolding of lies and half-truths I had built around myself began to feel suffocating, not protective. The weight of the compression top was becoming unbearable, a daily act of self-erasure that chafed against my soul as much as my skin. I was a butterfly fully formed within its chrysalis, and the instinct to break free was a biological imperative I could no longer ignore. I started small, testing the waters of my new reality in the safe anonymity of the world. I drove to a coffee shop 20 minutes from home, a place where no one knew Alex. I didn't wear a dress or dramatic makeup. I wore the androgynous women's jeans, the cashmere sweater, and I left my voice to find its natural, warmer pitch. When the barista, a young woman with a nose ring and a kind smile, handed me my latte and said, "Here you go, ma'am. Have a great day," the world didn't stop. It clicked into place. The word ma'am wasn't a challenge or a misreading. It was a simple, accurate acknowledgement of the person she saw. I sat in a corner, my hands wrapped around the warm cup, and I wept silent, happy tears. It had worked. I worked. Buoyed by that small, monumental success, I knew the final fortress was my own home. I chose a calm Sunday evening. My father was watching a game on TV, and the house was filled with its familiar, comforting sounds. I walked into the living room, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. I was just in my soft jeans and a simple V-neck top, my hair still short but styled in a softer, more deliberate way. I had no makeup on. This was the realest version of me I could present.
"Dad,"
I said, my voice clear and steady, holding the new warmth in it like a shield. He muted the TV and turned, his expression shifting from casual to carefully neutral as he took me in. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken years. He saw it all, the subtle curves, the softer jawline, the light in my eyes that had been absent for so long. "Son," he began, the words sounding like a foreign object in his mouth. He stopped, his eyes searching mine, and I saw the struggle there, the lifetime of expectation warring with the undeniable evidence in front of him. I took a shaky breath, the most important one in my life. "Dad," I said again, my voice soft but unwavering. "I need you to see me. Not the son you think you have, but the daughter who's always been here." The word daughter hung in the air between us, fragile and immense. I watched his face, saw the confusion, the fear, and then, slowly, a dawning, heartbreaking understanding. The journey wasn't over, but the longest, most solitary part of the road had finally come to an end. I had arrived at my own doorstep, and I was ready to be let in. The silence after my words was a living thing, a vast, empty plain where my future was being decided. I watched my father's face, a map of my own history, as it contorted through a lifetime of assumptions. His jaw worked soundlessly, his eyes, so like mine, darting over my face, my body, searching for the boy he'd taught to throw a football. I saw the moment the search failed. It wasn't a collapse, but a slow, painful surrender. The confusion in his eyes didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else, something raw and vulnerable, a father's love, stripped of its old context, scrambling for a new footing. He didn't speak for a long time. He just looked at me, truly looked at me, perhaps for the first time. He saw the subtle softness, the quiet confidence, the absence of the sullen tension that had been my constant companion. He saw the peace. All this time, he finally rasped, his voice rough with emotion. It wasn't an accusation. It was a plea for understanding. I nodded, tears finally spilling over, tracing paths down my cheeks that felt like they were washing away the last remnants of a disguise. "All this time," I whispered. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound of a world being dismantled and rebuilt in a single moment. He didn't get up, didn't try to hug me. The space between us was too sacred, too fragile for that. Instead, he slowly, deliberately, patted the empty space on the couch beside him. An invitation. I crossed the room and sat down, the cushions sighing under my weight. We sat there, side by side, in the flickering light of the muted television, the ghosts of 1,000 past Sundays hovering around us. The silence was no longer heavy. It was spacious, filled with the monumental work of reimagining. After several minutes, he spoke, his gaze fixed on the silent players on the screen. "What?" he began, his voice cautious. "What name does my daughter go by?" The air rushed from my lungs. It was the most beautiful sentence I had ever heard. It was a key turning in the lock of my life. I turned to him, a real, unburdened smile breaking through my tears for the first time in his presence. "Alara," I said. "My name is Alara." The name, Alara, was a secret I had carried for years, a whispered promise to myself in the darkest hours. Hearing it spoken in my father's voice, rough with emotion but laced with a determined respect, was like hearing my own soul called home for the first time. It didn't fix everything in that moment. The path ahead was still strewn with conversations with my mother, with extended family, with the world at large. There would be awkwardness, misunderstandings, and pain. But the foundation had been laid. The person I was no longer a secret to be kept, but a truth to be integrated into the fabric of my family. In the weeks that followed, a new, tentative rhythm began in our house. My father would sometimes stumble over the pronouns, his brain tripping on decades of habit. He'd say he and then immediately correct himself, a flush of frustration on his cheeks. "She," he'd grunt, his eyes meeting mine with a silent apology that was more powerful than any fluent speech. He started noticing things. "That color is nice on you, Alara," he said one evening, gesturing vaguely at my sweater. It was clumsy, but it was an effort. It was love, translated into a new language. My relationship with Chloe evolved, too. She was no longer my sole conspirator and guide. She became my sister in the truest, most joyful sense. We went shopping not as teacher and student, but as two young women. She'd hold up a dress and say, "This is so you, Laura." Her use of the nickname a gesture of effortless acceptance. We shared clothes. We did each other's makeup. We gossiped about people we knew. The dynamic had shifted from a rescue mission to a simple, ordinary sisterhood, and its normalcy was the greatest gift she could have ever given me. I still took the little white pill every morning. The rattle of the bottle was no longer the sound of a secret, but the sound of a promise being kept. To myself, the changes continued, my body slowly, gracefully, aligning itself with the woman I had always known myself to be. Looking in the mirror was no longer an act of scrutiny or hope, but one of recognition. The journey hadn't been about becoming someone new. It had been about having the courage to finally, fully, inhabit the person I had always been. The estrogen hadn't made me feminine. It had simply allowed my body to catch up with my soul. And in that alignment, I found not just a new gender, but my first true and deepest sense of self. The final piece of my transformation wasn't found in a pill bottle or a clothing store. It was found in the quiet, unremarkable flow of an ordinary Tuesday. I was standing in line at the grocery store, a basket hooked over my arm containing my favorite herbal tea and a new shade of lip balm. I was wearing my own clothes, bought from the women's section, my hair grown out to a soft, chin-length bob that felt entirely mine. My posture was easy, my expression calm. I was simply existing in the world as Alara. A young child in the cart ahead of me, a little girl with wide, curious eyes, pointed a chubby finger in my direction. My breath hitched, a remnant of an old fear. Her mother leaned down, and I braced for a whispered correction, a lesson on staring. Instead, the mother followed her daughter's gaze and smiled warmly at me. "I know, sweetie," she said to her child, her voice gentle. "She has very pretty hair, doesn't she?" The world didn't tilt. My heart didn't race. I simply smiled back, a genuine, unforced gesture of thanks. In that mundane, fleeting moment, there was no performance, no fear of being read, no exhausting internal narration about my appearance or my voice. There was just a woman being acknowledged as a woman by another woman, and a child learning that simple fact. The transaction was complete. The long, winding, and often painful journey from the terrified boy in his sister's closet to the woman calmly buying groceries had reached its destination. I had not just crossed over. I had arrived. And the most beautiful part was that there was nowhere left to go, because I was, finally and unquestionably, already home. Of all the sounds in the world, the gentle rustle of silk against my skin was the one that now sang the song of my own soul. It was the sound of authenticity, a quiet anthem for a life no longer lived in the shadow of a name and a body that never fit. The journey that began with the heart-stopping creak of a door had led me here, to this profound and simple peace. The fear, the shame, the desperate, clandestine experiments, they were all necessary steps on the path, the refining fire that forged the woman I was always meant to become. I still sometimes look at the old photos, the boy with the hesitant smile and the eyes full of secrets. I don't feel anger or disgust toward him anymore. I feel a deep, protective tenderness. He was my protector, the brave custodian who carried me through a world that wasn't ready for us until I was strong enough to emerge. He wasn't a lie, he was a shield. And now his duty was done. My father calls me on Sundays, his voice now effortlessly wrapping around my name. "Hey, Alara, how's my girl?" he'll ask, and the words are no longer a novelty, but a comfortable truth. Chloe and I plan a sister trip, debating destinations with the easy camaraderie of a shared history that now feels whole, no longer partitioned into before and after. The world sees me, and in their seeing, they confirm what I have always known in the deepest, most unshakable part of my being. The final, lingering ghost of doubt has been laid to rest. There is no conflict, no internal dialogue questioning my place. There is only the quiet hum of a life in alignment, the profound gratitude for the courage it took to become, and the serene, unshakable knowledge that the greatest transformation was not in my body, but in my spirit, learning to grant myself the permission to simply be. The journey is over. The life, my life, has truly begun.